Ever since I saw the Ouija boards in movies and how they work, I was obsessed with them. The idea of talking to supernatural gave me excitement. I became fixated on it after my first encounter. My first encounter with Ouija happened when I was only 11. I had walked into an antique shop with my father and found the board after seeing it in a movie the night before. The old lady who was the owner told me all kinds of stories, developing my interest in the board. At the end of the visit, I had walked out with the board, clutched to my chest with dried tears on my cheek. I had thrown a fit, threatening not to leave without the board. Over time, the one board turned into 10, 15, and to an impressive 42. I became a collector and obsessed over finding a real board that would let me converse with ghosts. 43 was my lucky number. The moment my hands touched the board, I felt chills up my skin. This was the real thing. I set up the board in my basement, keeping only a single bulb on as I saw in the movies. The light flickered as the board came under it. I shivered in anticipation and quickly placed my hand on the planchette. "Is anyone here?" I asked and almost jumped back as the piece moved by itself to yes. Just after the yes, a terrible smell filled the basement, making it hard to breathe. There was a horrible silence. My heart told me it was not a good idea, but my mind made me speak to the board again. "Are you a good or a bad spirit?" This query was answered real swiftly. The board was dragged hastily to a no. I was breathing with my mouth as the smell seemed to be getting worse with every answer. "Will you hurt me?" I asked hesitantly, feeling terrified of the answer. The board stayed on the no for a few seconds, but then abruptly halted at yes. I could now feel something closing in on me. The bulb overhead flickered even more. I was scared out of my wits, goosebumps rising all over my body. "Why?" I managed to say somehow, although my throat felt dry and constricted. For a long time, the board didn't move, as if it was thinking of an answer. It did move then, and the answer made me wheeze. It stopped on 3 alphabets. F-U-N. Fun. I whipped my head as some boxes in the corner clashed to the ground, and I heard the heavy footsteps of some white shadow inching towards me. The smell had become even more worse, making me cough and unable to speak. I coughed and coughed, trying to say the only word that could save me, which was goodbye. Couldn't say it. The coughing fit didn't seem to come to an end. I eyed the board and then dragged the planchette to the word at the bottom, saying goodbye. The air shifted so fast, clearing up the smell, and the bulb stopped flickering at once. I glanced in the corner and turned white, as there was a big gap in the wall, as if something had banged against it in anger. I got rid of my collection. I'm telling this story so you don't make the same mistake I made. Don't try the Ouija board. It is dangerous. I destroyed all of them in the fire, and if you have one in your possession, you should do the same. My best friend is a weirdo who believes in every horror story that she listens, and on top of that, she finds amusement in such tales. But regardless of that, she was my best friend until one day she went off limits with her actions. When we were in school and she left me a note in my locker asking me to meet up in our usual spot, a closed chemistry lab. A fire had broken out during some experiment, and since then, it was off limits, meaning it was the perfect place to hide when we wanted to skip classes. I sneaked into the deserted corridor leading up to the deserted chemistry lab. I walked up to the door and swung it open, standing with my mouth ajar at the scene in front of me. My best friend was sitting on the floor with a circle of candles around her and a wooden board ahead of her. I opened my mouth to say something, but she placed a finger on her mouth to silence me and gestured me to come over using her other free hand. The room was dimly lit, with the candles being the only source of illumination. My bestie had plastered newspaper on the windows to create a dark effect. I slowly went inside the room and sat down when she pointed me to sit. The room was giving off an uneasy feeling. It was quite disturbing to be in the room. Once I sat down, I saw that the board was actually an Ouija board. Something my friend had been talking about for ages. I had a really bad feeling about this now. She spoke up in less than a whisper, making the hair at my neck stand. She informed me how we were going to contact the undead. I felt even more unsettled by the situation. Before I could protest, she swiftly held my hand and guided it to the board, explaining what we were about to do. I was not a believer at all, but my instincts screamed at me to run off from there. "Are we alone in this room?" we both asked in harmony, and the wood we had been holding over moved. I didn't move it, meaning it was my friend who did. Anger surged in me, and I was about to pull my hand away when she clasped it with her other one, looking at me grimly and firmly, shaking her head. She said not to break contact. The way she said it, I could not help but be convinced. I looked at where the wooden piece had stopped. I gasped slowly as it had stopped on no. "I don't believe this. You must have moved it." I pointed at my friend, still angry. The moment my accusation was over, a wind came out of nowhere, shutting down most of the candles. This wasn't possible, since all the windows and even the door were shut. I glanced around, feeling the presence of something in the room. "How many of you are there in this room with us?" my friend questioned next. This seemed like an odd question. The wedge of wood moved once again. Stopping at 1, I let out a sigh of relief. I had been too quick to relax. It moved again, this time stopping on a 0, which translated to 10. My heart started thumping, and I felt it again, as if there was something around us, just outside the circle of candles. "Say goodbye." I urged my best friend, looking at her. She had the same look on her face, the same terror mirrored on hers. She nodded quickly, and we said a short bye. Just then, the door swung open, making both of us scream. But it was just the campus security. Me and my friend got busted, sentenced to a detention for a month by the principal. We never discussed that day ever again, and slowly stopped talking altogether because I didn't feel like being around her after what she dragged me into that day. I started living alone after my divorce, inheriting the house as my alimony. My lawyer said it was a win, but I could not agree. The empty halls and tall walls made me feel more empty and alone inside. I had a hard time sleeping alone in the night. I had some long, rough nights. One night, when I was getting ready for bed, I heard a thumping sound. It was a continuous thumping, as if something was trying to escape through a closed door. Although continuous it was low, my guess was it was some animal who got stuck in a house. I went towards the sound, walking down the hallways and stopping under the attic. The thumping sound died down the moment I got near the attic, but there was no doubt about it. The sound had been coming from the attic. I stood underneath the attic, unsure what to do. I could not think of the last time anyone went up there. It couldn't be an animal, or maybe it was a rat who managed to come through some pipe. I was speculating the source when another thump came. This one was loud, making me jump back. "Who is there?" I asked with terror evident in my tone. It went silent then. I mustered up my courage and pulled down the string to bring the ladder down. It was pitch dark inside the attic. I could not see anything from down in the hall. I decided to climb up. I slowly climbed the ladder, ears staying alert to any sort of sound. But it had become awfully silent. I got into the attic, coughing violently from the amount of dust I had breathed in. I covered my mouth and moved in to turn the light on. The attic lit up. It was covered with dust and spider webs. My eyes fell on the source of the thumps. Harmless books had been knocked down from a shelf, along with something else bigger than a book. I walked up to the fallen books and picked them up. These were my husband's. I smiled bitterly before picking up the other item that had fallen off. It was a wooden board. When I picked it up and turned it over, it had all these numbers and alphabets on it, along with the symbols of the sun and moon. At that moment, I couldn't recall what it was called. A few minutes later, I returned to my bedroom with the books and the board, drowsing off to sleep, still trying to recall the name of the board. When all of a sudden I realized that it is the same Ouija board that my husband forced me to try with him, and to spook me, had purposely moved the piece of wood. I gave the books and the board one glance and went to sleep. The next day was busy as usual with the house chores. I went to bed early that night, tired from doing all the work myself. Once again, I was awoken by a noise. This time, it was a low, scraping sound. I slowly sat up and glanced around. The sound was coming from the coffee table in the corner of my bedroom. I turned the lamp on and slowly walked up to the table, gasping at what I witnessed. The scraping sound was coming from the Ouija board. The planchette, the small heart-shaped piece of wood, was moving on its own. It moved frantically over all the alphabets, and even the numbers. Without thinking, I placed my hands down on the board and the planchette came to an abrupt stop. My body shook with fear, but I stayed rooted in the spot. I recollected something my husband had said. An important rule, to have a conversation and then say goodbye. "What are you?" I questioned in a small voice, my shaky hand moving on the small wooden piece on the board. I felt a pressure on my hand as if something heavy was touching me, and the planchette moved on the board, stopping on the alphabet SOMETHING, spelling out something. I got terrified because now I was certain that this was real. So I knew I don't have any other way out but to ask the question. "What do you want from me?" I inquired, while drenching in sweat. I felt that pressure again on my hand. It was heavy as the piece moved again, spelling out TALK, which spelled out to talk. I knew this wasn't going to end well for me if I did it on the other entity's terms, so I had to take a stand. "It's late. I want to sleep, and I don't want your presence near me ever again. Goodbye." There was a loud bang on the wall, making me scream, and then the pressure came again, this time with 3 times more force than before, making me groan in pain. The planchette moved under my hand. I kept groaning as the pressure escalated as the wood moved down the words GOODBYE, spelling out good. Bye. Pressure was gone, and I fell back with a gasp, hearing a small crack from my hand. After the incident, I sold the house and later on reconciled with my husband. When I told him what happened, he told me in a grim tone how lucky I was to walk away with only a broken hand, and if I had not made contact that night, I would certainly be dead.